I know the times where I've taught in colleges and we've had kind of rock courses, it's literally you have pre-Hendrix guitar playing and then post-Hendrix guitar playing, going to pre-Van Halen guitar playing to post-Van Halen guitar playing. So I don't think you can overestimate the influence of Eddie Van Halen. And we have two amazing guitar players with us today to help delve into his rhythm playing and a bit of his lead playing, his sound, some of the equipment. So let me introduce, we have Mr. Ben Castle and Mr. Steve Allsworth. So let's go over to you, Ben. Introduce yourself and tell these lovely people watching a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, hi guys, I'm Ben Castle. I've been a professional player for about the last 17 years. I work mostly in theatre, actually, musical theatre, touring around the UK, internationally, and I work in the West End, which doesn't normally lend itself to being a Van Halen fan, but I have I've often joked that I play any show as if I was Eddie Van Halen, which is kind of interesting when you hear Mamma Mia and things like that. But yeah, I've found that just his attitude really kind of inspired me, and so that way, anytime I get the opportunity, there might be a pick scrape or a harmonic squeal or a little bit of tapping if I can get it in somewhere.
So and then we have the incredibly handsome Mr. Steve Allsworth sitting over on the right of my screen. Say hello to the lovely people, Steve.
Oh, bless you, Mike. Thank you. Hello. So yeah, I'm Steve Allsworth. I guess long time contributor to guitar techniques and total guitar. And I've been teaching for about the last, 16 something years. Mike and I know each other for a long way back at the ACM Academy of Contemporary Music, and I've been teaching at BIM since, 2005. So yeah, a long time. And like Ben, a bit of West End theatre stuff, and we did Rock of Ages a few years ago. So that was an opportunity to don a wig and do widdly guitar solos with a wind machine, which was probably about as close as I'll get to doing the Eddie Van Halen thing. But it was, exactly the same as Ben. Just, had that at the forefront of my mind for sure.
I mean, I don't know about you guys. I came in a little bit late to the Van Halen thing. Because when I started playing, it was all about, I've got an older brother, 9 years, sorry David, 9 years older than me. So I grew up with him listening to Clapton and Zeppelin and Deep Purple and all those sort of guys, The Who, huge Who fan. So when I started playing, it was all about Clapton and Page, and then kind of getting into Hendrix. And a few people were talking about Van Halen, but it just wasn't, it wasn't on my kind of radar until someone showed me the video of Live Without a Net, and I was like, oh my God, who is this guy? Amazing. And I had to go back and completely relearn how I played guitar, because I just didn't have a hope in hell of getting anywhere near what he was doing with the vocabulary I had at the time. So Ben, how do you remember first hearing Van Halen or getting into the band?
Yeah, absolutely, and it's kind of a similar thing to you actually. It was mainly, most of my sort of early musical influences comes through my dad, who was a massive classic rock fan, and again was into Clapton and Zeppelin and all that kind of stuff. And I remember I must have been about sort of, 11 or 12, I guess, and he got a cassette of 5150. And that was it. And just hearing the opening of that, the sort of "Hello, baby," kind of stuff, and it was instantly kind of leapt out of the speakers and grabbed me by the throat. And but it was definitely, I think, unlike a lot of other people, it was the Sammy Hagar years first. It was 5150 and then OU 812. And then the more polished sort of sound that they had later on, and it wasn't until a few years later when I had kind of dug back into the Dave Lee Roth years of the band and sort of got that real raw kind of sound that they had at the time.
Yeah, the 5150 album, that's what got me in. I remember spending ages trying to learn to play Summer Nights. I think it was Summer Nights, and then without realising he was using a trans trem. I was like, how does he get his hands around that? What about you, Steve? How did you discover him?
Well, it's really interesting that we're all having the same conversation about our dads being into kind of heavy rock, I think I was the same route. So sort of my earliest memories are Led Zeppelin and Kashmir. So I think I always gravitated towards those kind of heavy riffs and heavy drums. And I think, you know, when I was sort of, you know, when I was a nipper starting to pick up the guitar, I guess that was around sort of 1984, around there. And then so I was sort of looking back as well. And it's funny as well, that Live Without a Net was a video which I burnt through my VHS when they existed so many times. You know, it was just that to me was everything. You know, that for me, that bit where he sat on the front of the stage just playing his guitar, and you can see the joy of playing the guitar. It was just unbelievable to me. I mean, apart from all the, you know, the sound and all the rest of it, that's what got me in for sure.
Well, it's interesting that you touch on the sound, because I don't think I'll be giving too much away by saying I think I might be a few months older than you chaps. And so my first experience, if you like, of Van Halen was Van Halen 1, not when it came out, but a couple of years later. A friend of mine was like, and he was the guy who always had like the AC/DC album before everybody else, and he was the guy who had like the Damned. I mean, that was an interesting point, because that Van Halen album for me came out at the same time as I was listening to bands like the Damned. So it was a really interesting. And one thing I didn't really get at the time was, you know, it was that thing where you just go, what is this guy doing? How is he? I mean, what is happening there? Is he? I'm not even sure he's playing. But the other thing as well, touching on sound, was the sound of the way that album had been recorded. So you got that whole thing where you basically had one guitar stuffed away on one side of the mix, and I think you had the technique was they stuck the reverb on the other side of the mix, and that was just it was a whole new ball game for me. When I first heard that, I was like, just an unbelievable, and the way that album starts as well. I mean, it's just a classic. It's a classic thing. So from that point on, I mean, so I came into it sort of like, you know, if we're talking eras, I suppose I came in David Lee Roth, and I think I sort of moved away slightly when it went over to Sammy Hagar. No disrespect, Sammy, but yeah. So the sounds, you're absolutely right, Steve. That sound is iconic.
It's wide, isn't it, as well? This is the thing, you know, because we often, like, now we sort of think about things being double tracked and playing the same thing to create that thickness, but this idea of one guitar and then the reverb on one side, it was just this really what is like the width of the sound.
Yeah.
And what most people forget as well is just it's all live. I mean, it's unbelievable to me, like his age and the fact that, you know, there's barely any overdubs and it's all just one take from start to finish. I mean, it's just, it still blows my mind now.
When you consider the hugeness of the sound, when it is just, I mean, essentially when Eddie's playing lead, it's just his guitar and Mike Anthony's bass and the drums, and that's it. And it still sounds like, you know, the biggest thing you've ever heard.
Well, it's all really loud as well. I mean, it's Marshall's really, really loud, isn't it? And I think I've always gravitated towards that sound, you know, whether it's, you know, Clapton playing a Marshall on, you know, full volume or whatever. It is a 4x12, really, really loud. And that's where you get that kind of sweet spot, isn't it? So
I think it was Steve Vai on Instagram the other day was posting a story about how he became friends with Ed after the David Lee Roth era, so after he left the band, and someone was playing him the original isolated guitar of I'm the One, and he said it just sounded like this symphony, and it was just one guitar, but it's just massive. And we were talking, Ben, we were having a chat just before the call, and we were talking about his kind of rhythm style and the way he took the power trio approach of Clapton into his playing. I don't know if maybe you want to show us a little bit of some of how he does that.
Sorry, me.
Yeah, Ben. Sorry, mate.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's kind of the what I sort of, the width of what he was doing, how much he could build apart, and the thing I was also going into with that is an element that they had, that Van Halen had, that a lot of bands didn't have at the time, in sort of, you know, late 70s. Everybody was kind of chugging on 5 power chords. And then Ed and Alex came along with these massive swing tracks that they do. Things like Hot for Teacher is probably the most famous one, where he'd just have those kind of huge riffs. And it was that shuffle, that massive shuffle feel that Ed and Alex could produce between the two of them. I mean, the big one for me, I think, is I'm the One, which is just so fast and right out of the gate. It's kind of balls to the wall, and it's really, I mean, I'll have a go. It's really hard to replicate, but. Just kind of from the downbeat, he's kind of swinging so hard that it's something that a lot of other rock players, I think, and actually Steve was talking about the influence, guitarists who were influenced by him, and he mentioned Nuno, and I think Nuno Bettencourt is one of the few guitar players who actually came out afterwards and kept that. I think you don't see a lot of that in some of the other players who just took the lead stuff, but he really had that kind of swing feel and took it onto the Extreme albums, which I think is kind of amazing. I think
for me it was definitely the riffs, just that kind of groove and the fatness of the riffs. I think Steve, you and I share a love for one particular one. My favourite riff right from the day one of getting into them, or I say day one after I kind of started dipping back into the Roth era, was Drop Dead Legs. I think it was the first drop D riff I'd learned. I hadn't experimented with drop D before, and it's just that bit coming out of the outro where he's got his volume wound down and he's doing that little open string thing, and then you just hear him wind up the volume and then kind of palm mute before he hits us with the riff. That's just beautiful.
Yeah, I think like when we all got that terrible news that it died, I think the next day that's the only thing I played. Actually, there were two songs, and they're both drop D, interestingly, which maybe goes back to that whole heavy riffs thing. But Unchained and Drop Dead Legs are probably the two for me. One of them's kind of drop D, but kind of in sort of E flat tuning, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
In fact, my guitar's I'm down a semitone as well, which is another thing, which is all part of that sound. But yeah, Drop Dead Legs is just, I mean, that whole, that kind of, the thing you're talking about, the winding. And it's interesting as well because I learned that completely wrong years ago, because all the tabs are completely wrong. They had that this is there's a little kind of whammy thing, so that, but he I mean, it's just glorious. It's just that it's slinky. That's what I love about it.
Greasy.
That and Unchained. I mean, Unchained was the one for me as well because it's got that. It's just. I mean, it's simple, right? It's just a bunch of triads. And that riff. I mean, it's just, yeah, that spoke to me. It still speaks to me.
What if we take? We've obviously got people watching of a wide array of abilities or experience. I'm sure we've got some real beginners watching and some very advanced players watching. Why don't we take 30 seconds? Why don't you talk them through the triads of that riff of the Unchained riff, Steve?
Well, it's really interesting because it's really it's like Keith Richards on steroids, really. It's a Rolling Stones riff, really. If you know this thing here where we're playing sus chords. So we've got like a D sus, then you've got like an E flat. It's like a Rolling Stones song, yeah. It's that kind of vibe, really. So we've got this kind of this is the thing. When you see this movement quite a lot when you're going from like one major triad, you know, like the A shape, to like an E shape. Same thing in Panama. That kind of. I'm in the wrong tuning book. You know, you get it's all there. So I think, yeah, it was really fond of that whole those kind of major triads. I mean, yeah, it's a lot of the songs. It kind of features all over the place, really, doesn't it?
Getting really nerdy. What freaks me out is, well, not freaks me out. I find amazing is how he does that stuff and makes it sound so perfectly in tune. You know, you got the guitar and the thirds and the even-tempered scale. Every time I play triads in those sort of positions, it's always just a little and then but he does it and it just sounds amazing. I don't know whether it's just the way he's got it tuned or whether he's kind of pulling slightly naturally with his fingers, but he always just makes it sound incredibly in tune.
It's all in the fingers. It's really interesting what you were saying before about Steve Vai, because there is that story where Eddie Van Halen is round Steve Vai's house and he picks up one of Steve Vai's Ibanez guitars and it sounds like Eddie Van Halen. Yeah. You know, and there was that whole thing, you know, people were like boiling strings and, you know, to try and get that Eddie Van Halen sound. It's just like, it's just in the fingers.
I think that's how sorry,
whatever you're doing. Sorry, go for it.
No, I was just going to say, I think that was how Spanish Fly came about. I think it was the story I believe I read was they were at a party at, I think it was Ted Templeman's house. And everyone was going, Eddie, play guitar. And he just had a little nylon string guitar in the corner. So he picked it up and played it. And everyone was like, oh my God, he still sounds like Eddie Van Halen. And so that's why they ended up creating a piece and putting Spanish Fly on the second album. So yeah.
Yeah, what a tune that was. Wow.
Ridiculous. I think Paul Gilbert actually posted a thing of him playing it on a guitar on Instagram. Yeah, it was either yesterday or the day before. One of the few guys that actually can make it sound kind of close.
Yeah, I did it. I did a transcription, I think. I'm not going to play it now because I can't remember. and also, I think there were quite a few drop-ins, right? So, like, but this is the thing, you know, trying to play somebody else's thing, the way they do it and the way that their fingers naturally gravitate to a certain way of playing something. I mean, it's incredibly difficult to do because he's not a very linear player, especially with the lead stuff. I don't think, if that sort of makes sense.
Yeah, we were talking, Ben and I, we were having a chat earlier and talking about his approach to lead playing. I know years and years ago I used to have lessons with a chap called Shaun Baxter that I'm sure a lot of you know out there, and it coincided with him interviewing Eddie, and they were talking about theory and Ed's approach and how he viewed notes as flavours, and he kind of felt that, well, he just went to that note when he wants to create a more slippery sound.
That was Dorian, wasn't it?
yeah, it was the major sixth. He said, well, it's slippier.
We got an interesting comment just come in, which is sort of just agreeing with what everybody's saying, honestly. It's from a guy called Alan Richardson. Hi, Alan. Thanks for watching. He says, shred, but so melodic too, just amazing. He set it up for all that followed. Vai, Nuno, Morello, such an influence. Then he goes on and says, he played the song. For a virtuoso player, he was always invested in the songwriting. You know, like playing keys when it suits, comping grooves, adding fills and licks between vocal parts. So, you know, we're talking about a virtuoso player here who understood, even at the level of virtuosity that he was at, and influence that he was at, he understood the sort of dynamic within the band and his position within the songwriting and within the sort of the performance. And I think that's a really interesting point. Thank you for that, Alan. What do you make of that, Mike?
Lead into the fact that one thing that's always struck me, and actually is what I think what you were starting to get at, Mike, just then, was that his stuff is really hard to replicate because it's so natural. When you look at a lot of the players who came after and who were influenced, it's practiced. It's kind of like you can break a lot of their runs. You know, you can break a lot of people's runs down and go, okay, this is a pattern of 16th triplets and it repeats up an octave and so on and so forth. But because Ed was just coming out with stuff literally from wherever he got it from, I've got these notes and it's the whole thing they talk about falling down the stairs and landing on your feet. You know, he kind of had a rough idea where he was going, and he had a rough idea of what he wanted to do in the middle, but the phrasing is just so completely natural, and it makes it really, really difficult to actually get close to replicating it, because it doesn't fit into those standard boxes that we all learn of here are my 16th note licks and here are my 16th triplet licks and all this kind of thing, because you've got 9s and 7s and 5s going off everywhere because he's just fitting it in, and then unerringly, bang, he'd land exactly in the right place on the right note every time.
That's an interesting point. There's an old colleague of mine called Pete Whittard, who is a great player, works at ICMP up in London. We had a conversation about the whole Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, Eddie Van Halen thing, and he said he really enjoys and is, you know, amazed by the playing of Vai and Satriani. He said, but the thing about Eddie Van Halen is it always feels like he's just about to fall off the edge. You're never quite sure if he's going to make it to the end, and it's that sort of expectation of, is it going to work, isn't it going to work, that sort of, you know, it feels so off the cuff in that regard.
Dangerous.
Dangerous, and that's the one thing that I think you find, you know, that, with no disrespect to the other guys who are both, I mean, Jesus, unbelievable players, but, you know, this idea that with Van Halen you're never quite sure if he was going to make it to the end, and of course, like you say, he does. He falls down the stairs, lands on his feet. It's an incredible thing.
I remember trying to learn the solo to Somebody Get Me a Doctor, and it's like you were saying, Ben, you got like a group of 5 and a group of 7 and then 4, and it's like, well, how do I slow that down with a metronome and kind of practice slowly? And you can't. You just go, well, there's your start point and there's your kind of end point, and you need to just kind of flow and try and land it. But then no one could really like he did.
Yeah, it's a nightmare to transcribe. I know that much. But, you know, this is the antithesis to all of this, isn't it? Because, you know, I'm a big Vai fan as well, and I was, you know, sort of, I guess Eddie Van Halen got me into Steve Vai and Dave Lee Roth and stuff. But the idea that it's studied, you know, all of their stuff is studied, and you know, I hold my hands up. I've taught this stuff and I've transcribed this stuff, and I guess it's kind of flies in the face of all that stuff and the beauty of where it comes from. I mean, that's it, isn't it? It's really interesting.
Well, Eddie himself actually tells a story in one interview about we were watching the other day, and it's about with his music teacher, and he's sort of basically, his music teacher believes that he's teaching Eddie how to read music, and but Eddie's not really learning how to read music, but his ears are so good that he can kind of fool the guy into thinking that's what's happening, until the point where the guy is his teacher is out doing a piano recital, and he's got Eddie there to turn the pages for him on his sheet music, and he's going, when the time comes, turn the page, and of course Eddie's got no clue what's happening, and the guy's looking at him going, why aren't you turning the page? And he's like, because I don't know where I am. And it's like there's this sudden moment for the teacher that all of that work he thought he'd been doing has kind of he's been kind of fooled, if you like, by this sort of innate ability and amazing ears. So yeah, there's some fantastic stories, a wonderful influence.
I mean, looking at his lead playing, I know, Ben, we were talking about the Beat It solo, and I know you kind of broke that down and learnt that. Why don't you take us through some of his techniques that he employed? Because that's obviously one, for especially the non-Van Halen fans, that was the iconic solo that brought him to a new audience, because obviously working with Michael Jackson. So why don't you talk us through some of that?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that is kind of the one. That's the Van Halen solo that Van Halen fans, or the non-Van Halen fans will have absolutely heard. And to be honest, I think I'd probably heard that solo before I knew who Van Halen were as well, I imagine. But it's a really great microcosm of pretty much everything that his playing was. I mean, the first thing I kind of love about, I've been playing that solo on and off, I think, for probably about the last 10, 12 years at least. I did a short stint on the Thriller Live Michael Jackson tour, where I got to play it every night on stage, which was fantastic. And getting used to playing it while walking around the stage was a hell of a challenge as well. It's not just sort of sitting there playing it. But it kind of fits in loads of the different techniques that made him what he was. I mean, it kind of starts off with this whammy bar harmonic line that just kind of grabs you from the beginning. So he kind of, and it's like straight away you're in. And obviously, that's, even if you just been listening to the Michael Jackson song, that's gonna prick your ears up. But then obviously you get the next line is tapping, and this is kind of one of the interesting ones where what we were talking about, Mike, was about how with a lot of his lead playing, and I think this kind of comes back from the fact that when he was in the band and he was soloing, he only had the bass underneath, so his harmonic field was really, he could do whatever he liked really, and make it work. And so you get this tapping line, and he's kind of tapping, and he's basically, the backing is in natural minor, so it's got a C in it, and he's playing essentially Dorian over the top, because the pattern is symmetrical, and he's just shifted the pattern down from the E string to the B string. But then because his ears kick in at the end, he sticks a C in to kind of make it line up with the backing where it needs to, which is incredible. But it's just that idea he had of where, like you say, it's like jumping off the cliff when you're not sure, and then worrying about the parachute later. He's just got a line that he knows, a series of notes that he knows works, and he'll repeat it down the strings and work out where he's going to finish when he wants to finish. And then the third phrase is the one that really separates the men from the boys when you watch people learning this. Because if you listen to the record, it's so smooth, everybody thinks it's tapping, but actually it's one of these huge stretch licks that he would play. Whereas he's essentially got the same kind of pattern. It's a sort of that pattern across the E and the B string, but it goes into this rolling move. And if you listen to it on the record, everybody, it sounds like tapping, but he's just stretching it, and you can't actually play that order of notes tapped because of this lower note. And so it gives the impression of that smoothness, but he's just shifted from one technique to another, and it's seamless on the record. You can't hear it. And you just get more of this whammy stuff, but it's that kind of stuff. You can hear those licks. Those licks with the symmetrical patterns appear everywhere. You've got one, because it's similar to sort of the end of the jump solo. He'll take these runs where he's kind of sort of thing, and he's just repeating a pattern of fingers. It's 1, 2, 4 all the way up, and some of the notes are in the key and some of them aren't, and it lands at the end on exactly the right note. And because he hasn't got a lot of keyboards or harmonies going on behind, you just get the colour on the way up, which is what you were talking about before.
I think you said one of the things you said there, Ben. Sorry, Steve. That I think is really important is you said it was seamless, and that's the thing for me with Eddie. I know when I started kind of trying to learn some of the stuff, and then like with you, Steve, the Steve Vai and the Satriani stuff, I was kind of, right, okay, well, I'm going to learn some tapping, and I'm going to learn the whammy bar stuff and the pinched harmonics and the tapped harmonics. But the thing with Ed, it just became such a natural part of what he did. If you see him just playing and jamming, he's going for the whammy bar, he's throwing in taps. It's just his expression. He did it so naturally that it was just like speaking to him.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. I'm so busy listening to you. I wasn't reading the question that's been. Well, it's not really a question actually. It's a conversation piece. I know we've already touched on Eddie Van Halen's influences, if you like, or the people that he tried to learn from. But there's a comment on the Facebook page, and it's from Folly Fatale, and Folly says, Kirk mentioned earlier, Kirk Fletcher, who we had earlier on today, who was amazing. Kirk mentioned earlier to listen to all the music you can. At the time of Eddie's emergence, I wonder who he was listening to the most. Well, we know he was studying Eric Clapton, and we know that he had an affinity to the style of Jimmy Page. But where do you think, what influenced him into the player that he became? Or was it just a sort of a natural progression within him?
I think he'd always been around music, hadn't he? Because his dad was a musician, and he'd played drums and piano. And I think him and Alex swapped. Alex was playing guitar, so I think obviously growing up in a musical household, he talked a lot about being a massive Clapton fan. But then I read an interview when he was saying that the whole tapping idea came to him when he saw Jimmy Page doing a legato thing and then holding his hand the other side to move the note. So he just thought, well, actually, I can do that like that. And that's how he kind of took the tapping thing on. But I've seen David Lee Roth interviewed, and he talks a lot about, as a band, they listened quite a bit to Black Sabbath and Deep Purple, and a lot of the darkness of the riffs came from that, mixed with that bluesiness of the Led Zeppelin and Clapton. I definitely think you can hear that in Van Halen.
I think the piano as well, you know, I mean, the stuff that I played earlier, you know, when you've got the pedal tone, open string thing, and then the sort of triads and the chords over the top, the piano thing is there, isn't it? And with all those sort of arpeggios, you know, the Hot for Teacher, you know, all of that kind of stuff where you've got this sort of classical idea, which is, you know, part of a tapping thing. I don't know, it's
going to say, actually, you mentioned Deep Purple. I seem to remember reading at some point that there was a Ritchie Blackmore. I mean, if you think of Ritchie Blackmore, was also doing those slightly classical classical arpeggio things. He was doing it obviously differently and with picking and stuff, but the sound of having rolling arpeggios, I think could maybe well have come from a Ritchie Blackmore influence, I guess.
I think the roots of Eddie are very blues. You can hear the Jimmy Page, Eric Clapton thing, but I think definitely you've got those players that, like Ritchie Blackmore through the 70s, were bringing in that slightly more scalic, slightly more arpeggio-based approach that did have its roots in classical music. That you think of Van Halen as a kind of party band and all that stuff, but there's definitely elements of that in his lead playing, for me.
Oh yeah, listen to something like Cathedral, you know, or something like that. It's, you know.
Yeah, beautiful. I couldn't figure that out. I remember Nuno always talks about the fact of trying to figure out, rather than doing something exactly how someone else has played it, try and find your way of getting a similar sound. And with the Cathedral thing, obviously got the delay set to 3/16, then using the volume pot. And then Nuno, lots of people use that. Albert Lee's used that. The Edge, YouTubers use that. But then Nuno used that in Flight of the Wounded Bumblebee. Is that the thing?
Yeah,
and I've seen people trying to play that, not realising they've got the 3/16 delay on. Yeah, I would say impossible. Well, for me anyway, impossible. Definitely.
Yeah, it's a bit like trying to play the Brighton Rock without the delays.
Yeah.
You know, or play all the bits.
Yeah.
Guys, it's been so good to sit and chat with you. Thank you so much for coming and contributing to what is ultimately an incredibly important part of the Festival of Guitar, because it's clear from the outpouring of grief from so many players. I mean, you know, when the news broke that Eddie had died, I mean, Instagram and, you know, all the social media channels were just flooded with people wanting to pay their respects to a hugely influential player. So thank you so much for coming on and spending a bit of time with us and talking about your love for all things Van Halen. What we've done is we've kept, Ben, we've kept your Beat It solo video to the end. And there's a simple reason for that, just in case the Facebook algorithm decides to take us down as a result. I don't think we can handle many more technical issues today. So we thought what we'd do is we'd save your video of you playing the solo to the very end. But I just want to take, and Mike, I'm sure you will back me up on this. Steve, it's been great having you. Great to see you again, by the way. Thank you so much.
I know, it's been a while. A pleasure. Honestly, 45 minutes is not enough. I could do this for hours, but yeah, thank you.
Well, we will almost certainly be looking at doing this again. We're going to say goodbye to the guys. There they are.
Yeah. So lovely to meet you, Ben.
Wave.
Steve, when all this craziness is over, we'll have beers.
Yeah.
And cheese.
And cheese.
And cheese. I like it. Okay, well, there's our tribute to the great Eddie Van Halen. And we will hopefully be played out by Ben's. Don't cringe. It's awesome. Being played out by Ben's Beat It solo.